bad girls do it well. Faster, young bad girls do it well. Faster, young bad girls do it well. Faster, young bad girls do it well.
I am a powerful woman, and my growing feminism will cut you in half like a righteous blade of equality. I don't need you to give me my freedom. I am a grown woman.
I think you personally just set the feminist movement back 50 years.
Hashtag Glee hates girls.
Welcome to our first episode of The Cult of Awesome. It's a podcast hosted by me, and I am Wishy, aka wishywood.tumblr.com. And my co-host for this is Could Be, who is
Hello.
Could Be Your Life on Tumblr. And we have a guest today who is Crystal.
Hi.
Who is
I'm
Gift to the City at
on
Tumblr. And this podcast it's not Glee focused. However, we decided to do the first episode focus on Glee since that's where we all have common ground fandom-wise. I've known Could Be since pretty far back in the day, back in the LiveJournal days, that old era.
That's when the jocks meant something.
Exactly.
So, maybe if you get that reference, you're too old.
Yeah, some people will get it. If you don't, sorry, you're just not old enough. So we were both in, yeah, Crystal doesn't know anything, so she only knows Glee. That's like her first fandom. But anyway, Cookie and we were both in Buffy fandom, though I don't think we really knew each other during that time. But I think then we were both kind of in Veronica Mars fandom, and then dropped off each other's radar forever. And then we found each other in Glee fandom, and I think it took a while before I was like, oh, you're that person who was on LiveJournal back in the day. So that happens when you're in fandom for a really long time. Sometimes you lose track of someone, and then you find them later on in another fandom, and weren't friends with them before, but then suddenly you're best friends. It's weird. Anyway, our topic for our first episode, like we said, we wanted to do something on Glee since we all watch Glee and are involved in the fandom for better or worse. And we decided a good topic to begin with would be Glee and feminism and sexism, just because it's a pretty hot topic and we are all, I think, self-identified feminists. And like to discuss pop culture, TV shows, movies, etc. through a feminist lens. And Glee in particular can be pretty infuriating to watch as a feminist, and yet none of us have permanently quit. Except maybe Crystal, I don't know, she's on the fence.
But, I have been almost successful. I haven't seen the finale of season, 4 that we just finished?
Yes.
I haven't watched the finale, so...
Yeah, I've had moments where, I go without watching an episode or two, but so I always get sucked back in.
Yeah.
And I blame the people, because some people in Glee fandom are really awesome, and it's really hard to be on Tumblr and not be
definitely
involved in some way. And, yeah.
I've managed to only do some edits for this season. I'll watch, there's a scene here, a scene there. Or I'm trying to think. I think I watched I Do was the last episode I watched all the way through. Really? Good for you. Yeah.
I admire your willpower.
I think there are certain characters, I'm seeing them, I'm like, why? So it was, blood pressure, etc. So,
yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, if we're discussing Glee as a feminist show, the question is Glee actually a feminist show? And in order to even touch that, I think first we need to kind of have a broad definition of what feminism is. Obviously, it's a very decentralized movement, and it's not always just a universal definition. But I don't know, Could Be, do you want to say what your personal definition, I guess, would be for feminism, or what makes a feminist TV show?
it's one of those things, and again, like you said, it's very multi-layered, and it's going to be, it can be good to one section of women, but not to the other. But it just starts off on, do the women matter within the show? For me, it's like, if the woman doesn't exist, is she just there as a pair of boobs? Is she there just to support the men? And just because a woman exists on a show doesn't make it a feminist show. So, is it good for the ladies? Kind of is my baseline. Do I need to take a bleach bath after I watch it? That kind of thing. I mean, and I think that Glee has probably lowered my bar significantly for the stuff that I'm putting up, that I'm willing to go, oh God, what fresh new hell. And that's the most actually. Go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, that's interesting, you're talking about, like, lowering the bar, because I feel like I've done that too, that, like, there's so much shit that Glee does that I would not put up with other TV shows and keep watching. So, and I mean, I've quit other shows before, even ones that I've, sort of been invested in, just because I found them, like, too offensive or problematic. And it's not like Glee is not hugely problematic. So I guess the question is, why do people like, us who, have like these sort of strongly held beliefs or care about the media they're watching reflecting that, stick with Glee?
Okay, I think I stayed particularly just because it's kind of, like you mentioned before, it's my first fandom. So it was the first time I kind of started to think critically about a show, and Glee is so easy to critique because there are so many problems. So for me, kind of getting into this mindset, it was a good show for me to kind of dig into and learn what's good, what's bad. And at the same time I got into Glee was the same time I was kind of learning about feminism and, intersectionality and a lot of different things. So it just kind of worked for where I was at that point in my life. So that's why I kind of stick. And then there's the people also that I, made friends with.
Right.
And, but for you guys, I mean, you've been in other fandoms. You've been doing this for a while. So why do you stay?
Well, I think I was going to say that, like you said, there's so much to, like, pick apart with Glee. But part of that is because Glee has a huge chunk of representation in one show. Just through, racial diversity, sexual orientation diversity. Not that obviously any of that is handled ideally, but it's there. And there are a lot of shows that you can watch that maybe are more fit within the feminist definition. However, they might be a lot more limited as far as what kind of representation you're seeing. So there's something kind of exciting, like, even when it's really badly bungled, it's like, well, at least you're seeing these characters, like, on TV. And especially when Glee first started, I don't think there was a lot on the air. And it seems like since then, it's sort of, I don't know if it's at all, like, Glee's influence or just general evolution of, like, society. But it seems like now we have more options, but Glee still does offer a lot of diversity just in terms of what kind of representation you're getting. I mean, there's actually, like, a trans character who's on this show who isn't, the lead, but it's a pretty big character. And the only other show I can think of, I think Elementary does have a trans character. I don't watch Elementary, but I think they do. I know Orange is the New Black does.
That's what I was going to say,
I'm sorry, what was the other one?
Elementary, Orange is the New Black.
I think Degrassi maybe or something.
Yeah, Degrassi does, but they actually, I found out, spoiler, they just killed off their trans character. So,
Ooh, of course they would. I would say, obviously, Orange is the New Black at least handles trans issues infinitely better than Glee does, but, it's still there. So I think that's something is that people, even though there's so much to pick apart, at least compared to other shows, they're putting it out there to be picked apart.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know for me, like, because I kind of, like, rage checked out towards the end of season 1, and then I kind of came back in season 2 because I loved Kurt. Kurt was going to get a boyfriend, and then also, I got really excited with the Santana stuff. And as somebody who had her first kind of fictional baby lesbian feelings all over Willow and Tara on Buffy, I was like, but this time they're not going to kill her, and so, you have that there was this thing with Glee in season 2 where you kind of had this thing where they're giving you something, and it was in a lot of ways so much better than anything I know I had when I was younger. You know, that you have that little bitty hope that every week that maybe this week it'll be back to not being awful. And because there's every so often that thing in there that you're like, okay, somebody gets it. And I think because it's about people that are marginalized at times, you kind of crave that. And so it's something that keeps you kind of hooked into it, even though you know you're going to go and get punched in the face every week. Some weeks you're going to get punched in the face, but you're hoping you're going to get a shiny present afterward. So it's why I think, too, it keeps so many people on edge for one or two characters or one or two relationships, too. So that's kind of my take on it, is I know that there's one or two things that I'm like, I just need to see this happen. I just want that to happen. Why does that never happen? Once it hooks you, it's, you know, a whole chasing the dragon scenario.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, moving on more to the topic, you know, we're discussing, we didn't even really answer whether Glee is a feminist show.
I think that the hysterical laughter when that question was asked gives a good answer, probably where we're coming from on that.
Yeah. We're going to
we kind
pretty
of
much
all
answer with examples.
Right.
So,
you know, I think you could maybe isolate a few moments that had feminist overtones, but on the whole, I find Glee to be, at times, at its worst, kind of appallingly and indulgently misogynistic. The thing about Glee is that, like I said, there is such a huge diversity, and there's a lot of female characters, and they're not all completely sidelined. And I always think that, like, Glee is a show that drives everyone nuts because it always has so much potential, but never lives up to it. And, like, concepts and characters and storylines and everything. It just, like, falls down on pretty much everything. But everyone is so mad about it because it could be so great.
Yeah.
You right? I don't know if I'm the only one who feels like that, or...
Go ahead. I was just going to say, it's just the whole How I Met Your Mother concept of it keeps you on the hook. You think it's going to happen, but then it never is going to happen. Even though we should know at this point that it's never going to happen.
Right. Charlie Brown and the football syndrome.
We should know
that. Hoping it's going to be different, and it's not. And I think one of the more obvious ways that Glee shows its hand as far as how it treats its female characters is when you compare them to the male characters on the show.
Oh, definitely.
And one of the things is that when I was discussing doing this episode with Could Be, that she brought up was the idea that the male characters are treated as leaders and strive to be leaders, whereas the female characters who are, you know, given any kind of motivation or drive are assigned as wanting to be stars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Finn and Rachel thing, which is the whole thesis into itself, but, you know, Rachel, it's always about how she's selfish and she has to learn that it can't always be all about her, even though the entire thing of her is that she's a star. But Finn always, every time, every dude character, I think at this point, at some point, is a leader, because that's what it means to be a man. Whereas Rachel, Mercedes, Tina, everybody, they all have to learn that, yes, you can be a star, but it can't be all about you, but that's all they ever get. Whereas men get to be awesome and leaders and humble and true of heart and all this kind of stuff that's very moral, and women are just kind of, well, ambitious.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it was especially obvious, too, when, you know, Blaine was kind of named the new Rachel, but Finn gave him, like, a whole pep talk about how he, like, was the gel that held the Glee Club together, and he's such a leader. And, I mean, Rachel was never really given that. Like you said, with Finn and Rachel being, like, the head of the Glee Club, it was always Finn who was the leader.
Exactly. She was the one, you know, and not only that, even the difference between Marley's motivations as far as, you know, her being the unofficial new Rachel was just probably the last thing that I really have any idea what happened with Marley on, versus, you know, Blaine, where Marley was, well, she's talented and poor and she wants to be popular or whatever. And then when they introduced the Glee Project kid,
Ryder?
You know, he was
Ryder?
Yeah. I think, I don't care, don't know his name, don't care. He got the whole big intro about being, a leader and a great guy, and his problems are deep and important, and da-da-da. Marley just wants to be a star because she's poor.
Yeah.
But even then, Marley doesn't get to have any real ambition because she's kind of Rachel light, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and when you're talking about the men taking these leadership positions too, there's always the fact that they're generally, it's like a very like noble ambition.
Yeah.
Finn struggles with his popularity versus doing the right thing and being in Glee Club and stepping up to be a leader. But, it's framed as very noble, like his sacrifice of his privilege as, being this popular jock type character to socialize with the misfits and is considered, very like sacrificial, and it's like he's doing it for the right reasons, versus when Rachel, a lot of the time, her ambition is framed in a like selfish way, and that her striving to be famous and to be recognized for her talent is always, it blinds her, and she's always learning over and over the lesson of she needs to be humbled. Finn was always teaching her that. You had Kurt putting her in her place multiple times. A lot of different characters do. I don't think there's ever been a female character who has been shown to be a leader in a positive light, and the only one instance I could think of is Mercedes kind of took charge of the Trouble Tones after a really awful
introduction
sabotage on her character in the lead up to that. But, she was shown to be like a good leader for them, but, that was very like temporary, and I don't think it's very representative of Glee's, the way Glee frames those issues.
Exactly, because even in that instance, the Trouble Tones was a female group, so there weren't any men there. So, had there been men there, they probably would have taken that position, no doubt. From what we've seen, it's basically they needed somebody and they only had girls, so they threw Mercedes up there. And there were lots of problematic elements to that storyline anyway.
Yeah. And then in the end, they get smacked down by a bunch of dudes. Anyway, they have to go and also have star power Sam Evans and Blaine, who is the most talented of everybody. And Finn smacked them down and beat them at regionals. They didn't even get a case or because the other group gets second place at whatever it was. They couldn't even get that. They just take it shut down, period. And then crawl back to Glee Club. Yeah. Because they were so selfish and wanted to not, entire fuck up with the storyline. So.
Yeah, because they wanted recognition. How dare they?
Exactly.
Right.
And, just the fact that nobody in the show sat and said, we're going to have our all-female group get completely smacked down by a bunch of guys, presents no problem to us whatsoever, I think is one of those things where you go, okay, you get that insight into the writer's room that there is no insight whatsoever. They're just like, thing happened, put it on paper, let's go, act it out, puppets. No kind of idea what they're really doing.
There's no, internal logic going on in the Glee writers' room. Well, and I think when you're talking about the Trouble Tones, too, that kind of brings up the fact that even within the female characters, it's not like they're across the board treated the same, even at the same level of badness. I think you can't really discuss feminism without discussing, the other issues that affect that, the racism that goes on. I think two characters who are often singled out for being the most poorly treated are probably Quinn Fabray and Tina Cohen Chang. And even as horribly as the narrative has treated Quinn, I think there's a difference in the way that Tina has been treated. It seems like it's not just fodder for dramatic material. It's really mean-spirited, and not even just towards Tina as a character. I think it crosses the line towards being personally insulting to Jenna Ushkowitz.
Yeah.
Which it's very strange to me. It's I don't think I've watched a show where the writers have those moments of jabs and being really cruel to the actors, because Glee has that weird hybrid a lot of the time with, like, the characters kind of crossing over into the cast's personal lives and then making, like, meta references. And I can't help but feel like that's kind of what happens with Tina. I don't know. Crystal, you have a lot of feelings about this, don't you?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I was particularly interested in Quinn just after she was, like, shat on for, like, the first kind of half of the series. And then once I got deeper into fandom, I started realizing, I mean, I didn't even pay much attention to Tina, so I guess, like, I mean, that says something about the show, too. Like, the show didn't really bring her up very much at all. She was always shoved into the background. I didn't care so much. I wasn't invested. It wasn't until I got deeper into fandom that I started realizing how horribly she was actually treated. When I was talking to you guys earlier, I brought up that I think Quinn, the writers tend to just, they like have her grow a little bit and then they just ignore that growth and kind of revert her back to the bitchy cheerleader from season 1 that she started off as. But I mean, it's always,
you almost think like they didn't know what to do with the character at all after the first season. It's like constant resets.
I don't know.
They just like, you know, revert back because where do we go from there? It's always like they, you know, there's some success and then she gets torn down again. She gets into Yale. Then she gets hit by a truck. She starts to, you know, see that maybe she has a future and then suddenly she goes crazy over her baby again. Like, it's just constant with her. But with Tina, like you said, it's just mean-spirited. There's no reason, like she was never established as a mean person in the beginning. It's not like she even had any growth. They just shove her in the background altogether. Don't, like, care about even developing her. Quinn, they try and then they fail and then they just go back. But Tina, it's just like, whatever, we don't care enough to...
Well, I think with Quinn, the writers actually think they gave her really good material sometimes, like, even though they do these awful things. And, you know, yeah, it is. But I think with Tina, it seems like a lot of the time they, like, revel in humiliating the character. Yeah. And it almost is like they're trying to write the archetype of kind of the buffoon, like, you know, Jerry on Parks and Recreation. Yeah. And you have those types of characters, and I tend to not like that archetype because, yeah, exactly. I tend not to like that archetype because I have, like, I'm too sensitive or empathetic that I always find it really, you know, awful when there's that one character everyone shits on. Yeah. And it's supposed to be funny because everything just always goes wrong for them. And I feel like that's what they at times are trying to do with Tina, but then they'll turn around and, like, try to make you sympathize with her, but, like, in really awful, like, ways, like, in no way with a person, you know, like the whole Vapo rape.
Oh, God.
You know? I mean, that, I feel like the writers honestly wrote that and were like, wow, what a powerful moment we have given this character. And, like, you know, Blaine apologizing to her at the end, and it's like it makes no sense, and everyone watching it is like, what the fuck is going on? What did I just watch? And, you know, but they think that's, like, how human interaction works or something, and, like, that's supposed to be, like, really moving and sympathetic. It's so weird. I don't even understand it. And that's why I think that's where Glee falls apart when you try to analyze it, because the writers are so detached from how a normal logic, human logic.
Yeah.
I think with Tina, too, you have the, you know, she's never, like with Jerry, to kind of, you have the fact that Jerry is, we are seeing that the people who are giving Jerry a hard time on Parks and Rec are assholes. There are multiple episodes where people are like, dude, why are you so mean to Jerry, basically? And we are actually shown that Jerry is this nice guy and all this kind of stuff. Whereas with Tina, not only do we have kind of like this sort of internal justification, because, you know, you have Brittany as the sort of truth teller telling Tina how she sucks and she's never going to be an actress and da-da-da-da-da and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of internally justified then because they also have, well, Tina's a bitch and she deserves it. Or Tina sucks and why is Tina, I mean, everything about props. Oh my God. Or what's coming up, spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. You know, everything about Tina ends up being justified that she has to be the butt monkey because Tina is a dumb, selfish bitch. You know, Tina's life is basically dumb, selfish bitch.
Exactly. I feel like bad for saying it, but the truth is that You know, I really liked Tina for the first 3 seasons, even though she was really marginalized and background and silenced. But she would have some moments where she was a likable character. She, you know, she had that, like, rant at Artie about, like, her little feminist rage, and she had moments with Mike that were really sweet, and her sex-positive, actual feminist telling of having her first time and how she didn't regret it, and it was, you know, a good experience, and you don't see, that was nice. That was, like, really nice, and
for sure.
She had some really good moments, but I feel like at this point, I can't say I really like Tina. I'm not saying I hate her. I'm not mad when she's on or anything like that, and I feel really terrible for Jenna that the writing has, like, done this. But I can't say, like, I enjoy her character because they've written her as being so unrootable in a lot of ways. And it makes me mad because I want to root for her, and there's so much about Jenna that I think is rootable. But, I don't know, I feel weird about it because I don't want the show to have manipulated me into not liking Tina just because they're assholes.
For me, it's just knowing, okay, Tina's going to have a scene. What horror is about to come? What discomfort am I about to experience? Because I could stand somebody all day long. Because I didn't care for Quinn in the first season, but then by the end of the first season, I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with you people? You know, if you're this awful to a character, I'm just going to like them out of spite. But with Tina, you know, it is like you said too, she is unrootable. They even have her, like, you know, basically like beating up on Marley, you know, about her eating, you know, she was the one cracking the eating disorder jokes and stuff like that, you know. Yeah. Because they don't have anything for Tina to do, they just have her be awful.
But that's the thing. That's what I was saying before. It's just, she wasn't like that initially. It was just they decided one day, like, oh, we need another, like, bitch to throw in, and then they just decided to have Tina.
I think it was part that, and I think that first they didn't really care about the fact that they had backgrounded her, but then people were bringing it up, and they kind of turned it into, like, a meta joke, and that they think it's funny now to use her as, like, a meta mouthpiece, but for opinions they think are ridiculous. Like the Glee, hashtag Glee hates girls. When Tina says that, we're supposed to think she's being ridiculous and dumb, and that's a commentary on the fact that was an actual hashtag that people would send to the Glee writers because they treat their female characters like shit, and that's what they think of those people. Like, they literally don't see any issues, and they think it's funny to mock because they think people are just being, like, ridiculous and awful. So, you know, and a lot of Tina's dialogue sort of reflects them mocking, I think, fans and things like that. I don't know.
Her entire thing in I Do about, you know, where she went off, or whatever, that whole thing where she went off about Blaine's butt and was yelling at Kurt for being so mean to Blaine, you know.
That was clearly mocking Blaine fans.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, whatever, but you have stuff like that in the, you know, evil lesbian bloggers from Britney earlier in the season, which I'm guessing Jenna and a lesbian killed Ryan Murphy's dog at some point is the only thing I can come up with because, like, dude, seriously, you don't like you just, you know, just let it go, man. Let it go. You will all be better for it. But it's so obvious that, I mean, it's just really contemptible when you hate everything that much. And you don't seem to notice, you know? I don't know. The lack of self-awareness on this show is just kind of mind-blowing if you
staggering
about it. But yeah, Tina, man, like, what the fuck?
That pretty much sums it up. Tina, man, what the fuck? You know, and it's just awful. And another thing I think worth discussing is the way that female friendships are treated on the show. There are kind of there are only a few that have been bothered to be developed, and to varying degrees of satisfaction. I think one of the most obvious ones would probably be Rachel and Quinn, which was at one point in season 3 especially pushed very hard, it felt like, all of a sudden.
Right before graduation was kind of when it started to, like, seem really in my face.
To a point of obnoxious Poirier, you know, I mean, that was the time where we had Brittany and Santana still not speaking, and when Brittany, you know, really absurd, and it occurred in the same season where I Kissed a Girl exists, which completely makes anything Glee does null and void forever. But, you had the two of them talking, Santana even making the comment, why don't you just make out with her or stop and, whatever it was about in the prom episode. And you had Quinn and Rachel.
That was a prime example of queer baiting.
Oh, for sure.
The show was very odd in that I think there has been a lot more queer baiting on the women's side versus the men's side, because I can't think of a ton of examples that were straight out and out, like, queer baiting with the male characters versus they were really quick to do that with Quinn and Rachel. I think that's been the most heavy-handed example. Yeah, maybe I'm missing something, but to me, in terms of the way that relationship was treated by the writing, because you have two straight characters who are both never going to be written as queer. Well, Quinn was later on, but I don't think it was ever thought at the time, like, that was a pairing that was ever going to happen, or we were supposed to believe that, or they had canon textual feelings for each other, and yet you get all these, like, teases to rile up the fan base with obviously no intent of ever following through.
Well, and you have with that, too, it fits with Glee's pattern where you have somebody, because Quinn, again, I was a huge fan of her in the first season, but even though Rachel did things like trying to steal her boyfriend and stuff, the relationship between the two of them was never one that was equal at all. It was always kind of this very bizarre thing, and Quinn was extremely cruel to Rachel at first. Yeah. And it became, and then later they tacked on this whole thing about Quinn's insecurities and all that kind of stuff, which, whatever, Glee. But it really fits into Glee's pattern of it being the person that is being aggressed upon that has to go and make nice with somebody, which is a whole other feminist issue. But it was very, if the friendship isn't based upon the two of them having common goals or anything, it's based on the fact that the two of them were mean to each other, and now they're going to try to be nice. And all their issues started
I think
Finn.
And even, especially, with Quinn and Rachel, that so much of their relationship and their scenes centered around Finn, the man in their lives, that it was almost hard to define it as, like, an actual friendship, because that was, like, all they seemed to pretty much talk about with each other.
Oh, yeah. It's all of their, like, bathroom scenes and stuff. Like, they always bring up Finn. They are always in the washroom together. I don't know. But, yeah, they're always bringing up Finn. Rachel's always like, like, you had everything, like, popularity and Finn. And it's always, even if he's not, like, the main topic of the conversation, he somehow works his way into it. And it just brings you back to season 1, when that's the only reason that these two characters even interacted, is because of Finn.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the conflict even between Santana and Rachel started because Santana was going after Finn.
Yeah.
At the late season 1, and then in season 2, you had that was a thing up until, not the point.
You're trying to think of friendships that really, if you're going to discuss it kind of in, like, using the Bechdel test, which is not an indicator necessarily that something is feminist. I think that is a disclaimer. It just is an indicator that they're of women's presence. And for those who don't know, the Bechdel test is, there are a couple rules for it. There have to be 2 women in a scene together by themselves. The women have to be named, and the third rule is that they need to be discussing something other than a man or men. And this was created by, I think it was like a comic artist back in, like, the late 80s or so. 85, something like that. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And all it's supposed to do is you're supposed to apply it to films and TV shows, and it's just a measure of women's presence. And you'll be shocked at how few TV shows or movies will actually pass this test. And even passing it does not mean that it's a feminist piece of media. And honestly, there are probably ones that don't pass it that are considered feminist. I know, I haven't actually seen it, but I know Pacific Rim is a movie that does not pass the Bechdel test, but a lot of people have been holding it up as, like, a feminist movie, or at least has, a strong female. Avengers, you could maybe count that. And anyway, but I think if you apply it to Glee, that so many of the female friendships are based or centered around the men in their lives. So that kind of always revolves around back to that. Exceptions to that, I think, would be Rachel and Mercedes. And I actually really enjoyed their friendship in season 2. It was probably one of my favorite friendships in season 2, and I was extremely bitter and sad that they completely dropped it pretty much after season 2. And because I thought they had a lot of potential and they had some really like an interesting dynamic. It was, I think, a character that I could buy as being like a real friend for Rachel versus a lot of the other characters. They kind of tried to, I mean, Kurt, I think, works as a friend for Rachel, but I don't know, and I liked that Mercedes, I felt like that would be like a natural friendship that would happen in a high school, you know?
Yeah. Well, and then all of that, of course, got thrown under the bus for, you know, the whole Asian F thing where both Rachel and Mercedes had to learn a very valuable lesson about putting them in their place. You know, it's just Mercedes had to be more put in her place. You know, because of, and that goes back to how the white girls get treated versus the other girls. Mm-hmm. But you know, Mercedes, of course, had to be taught, Mercedes, how dare you step out of line and question Rachel's place, whereas Rachel had to learn that yet again.
Well, and I think if you're talking too about the friendships and how the white characters are treated in comparison to the female, like, women of color, Mercedes, I mean, I've enjoyed aspects of Rachel and Kurt's friendship, especially in season 2, and I was happy that happened. However, I thought it was really clear that Mercedes was completely pushed out of the picture to make way for Rachel.
That was awful.
Yeah. I mean, in season 2, I think they balanced it, and Kurt and Mercedes were still, like, friends, and they even had the 3 of them being friends.
Yeah.
But after season 2, it was like, Kurt and Mercedes barely interacted at all in season 3, I don't think. And that was very kind of like, it was uncomfortable to me. I mean, even if I liked, you know, some of the parts of Rachel and Kurt's friendship, and there was, you know, a lot I liked, especially in season 2, it was still, it made me very uncomfortable the way Rachel kind of like just really, because Mercedes is already pretty marginalized in the show to begin with, and it really was like, you know, and I know part of that was pairing their 2 critically acclaimed actors together, Leah and Chris Colfer, but it still was just gave me a bad feeling, especially because Rachel and Mercedes' friendship was also pushed aside, and we had room for like Rachel and Quinn all the time. I don't know. It just was another example of Mercedes getting the shaft.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things, again, if you know, when people say, well, it's because her character got an upgrade and he was going to get upgraded to the more higher tier character of his friend being Rachel, him and Rachel being friends. Again, you take, you know, pencil in Mercedes into the damn scene. It's all you have to do. It's not that freaking complicated, you know. And not only that, Mercedes, when you look back in some of the merchandise from season 1, she was very prominently displayed, you know, along with Finn and Rachel, you know, and a lot of stuff, you know. So it's not like Mercedes, you know, she really, by season 3, she had really been downgraded within the show. And it's, you know, just one of those things where they brought her out, she's saying that was it, in a way that, you know, now Tina kind of takes her place where, except for the singing part, where, you know, Mercedes got a snarky line here and there, and now Tina gets a whole lot of snarky lines. I don't know. But it was very, she just got completely shoved aside in that. So, I don't know.
I think another female friendship that could be discussed was like Unique and Marley kind of emerged this season, and my feelings was that it started badly. Not like the friendship was bad, but that it was very like clunky. It was like literally Unique being like, we're girls, we're best friends now, dish about boys. Like, it was literally like, that was the dialogue. It was, you know, you can't like build it up like at all. Like, these 2 characters have never interacted, and the first thing Unique says to her is, let's be like besties, you know? And I was like, why couldn't you just like actually build a foundation for this friendship? Because it ended up being, I thought, enjoyable. I thought it was, you know, I mean, I thought Unique was, of the new characters, if you count her among the others, I thought she was easily the most interesting addition to the show.
Sure. Yeah.
Both vocally and as a character. And, you know, Marley I was very lukewarm on to begin with, and she's not like a favorite of mine, but she's more tolerable now, and she has some moments, and I thought, you know, Unique and Marley made like a cute pair. And I liked how Marley, you know, stood up for Unique to, like, go to the girls' sleepover, you know, and she was very, like, unruffled by Unique as a person and just kind of admiring Unique. And so I liked that friendship. I thought it was sweet. I just thought it was sad how it really had, like, no organic development, and compared to, like, Ryder and Jake, and they had, like, I felt like they had a million scenes of, like, being bros and going from, like, hating each other.
Going from, like, enemies,
to,
competitors,
like,
to bros, yeah.
I'm having, like, face-clawing moments over here because at this, like, the little bit that I've seen and experienced of Ryder's character is one of those things where it's like, you can just put him as, like, okay, here is the problem. You are everything that, like, he managed to distill so much of what is wrong with the show into that character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just his cavalcade of childhood traumas to their treatment versus Marley's treatment, and so on and so forth. He was instantly getting, I just remember seeing gifs of him and Finn being like, "You're amazing and a rock star," and everybody was like, "Marley, you're poor."
Ryder is a prime example of this show's relentless pushing of, like, male savior characters.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Marley had this, you know, anorexia storyline that really just kind of, like, hit a dead end and didn't get picked up. It was just kind of left on the cutting room floor, or they forgot about it or lost interest. But you had Ryder kind of being, like, the solution, or, like, her motivation to get better should be that guys don't want to kiss girls who taste like puke, or whatever the line was.
That was,
you know?
so bad.
Yeah, and Cody is making stabbing motions right now. She's very upset because she's discussed this before. And this is the whole thing. It's like, the men always have to swoop in and tell the women what they need to do to fix their problems. And Ryder is certainly not the only example of it. You have Finn multiple times. I can't even begin to list how many times his character has been utilized that way. You have
Will.
Artie, who...
Will. How could we forget?
You have Emma's OCD being a very, like, serious thing, and the big issue is it would be an impediment for the relationship. You know, like, that's, like, the big problem with her being OCD, and, like, now it's, like, a serious issue for, like, him, and so now it's suddenly a problem, and he has to go in and try to fix it. Artie with Beast, and literally, like, grilling her about her sex life and telling her how she needs to, like, fix it. How fucking inappropriate is that? You are, like, a freaking, like, high schooler, and you're talking to an adult woman, you know, telling her what she needs to do with her body and her life, you know. And he's presented as being, like, correct, you know. These characters, male characters, are always presented as being correct in how these women need to, like, change or fix their issues or have their issues fixed for them because they aren't allowed the agency to do it themselves.
Poor freaking Beast. I mean, you have all of that. You have Will condescending to her and never been kissed. And then you have the whole Cooter storyline, which, I'm sorry, anybody that if you're going to make a character named Cooter, he needs to be entirely more entertaining than what we ended up with. You can't make promises, you know, I'm sorry, that was, like, that really made me angry. You can't give me Cooter and then not deliver on that. But, you know, you had then an entire episode or 2 episodes dedicated to her entire domestic abuse storyline, where the women were taught that women got taught a lesson about domestic abuse. And it was like, really?
And trivializing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Beast as a character in general is so, you know, I think Dot Marie Jones is a lovely person and actress, and she has done her best with the character to really add layers and vulnerability. But I think the writing for that character is so offensive on a feminist level, because she's like this, like, hyper stereotype caricature of, like, a masculine butch woman, and she has, like, a non-normative gender presentation that is ridiculed, and it's not, you know, at times it's like you're supposed to be, like, laughing at her. You're not supposed to be, like, oh man, I can't believe they're like mocking her. Like the whole like duets, was it? Or was it, no, Never Been Kissed, where they're fantasizing her in the tutu, and it's supposed to be such a turn off, and it's supposed to be funny, you know, and the fact that, you know, a woman like her is, you know, her biggest issues in her life have to do with her relationships with men or lack of relationships. Like, it is crippling to her. And, you know, that's so symptomatic of how Glee treats, like, adult women on the show, you know, that they are always, like, crippled by their relationships with men and the issues that they have. Shelby as a character I found appalling in the fact that first, I think there's something, I always get really bothered that women who always want to have children, they're always infertile. You know what I mean? Like, whenever a woman on TV wants to have a child, she has to deal with being infertile. And, you know, you had that happen with Shelby, that she couldn't have children of her own. And the fact that, you know, she had done this favor and, you know, been a surrogate mother, and, I mean, she's compensated, but... And then later in life, as a very successful vocal coach or whatever, she still looks back and her life is incomplete because she doesn't have children and she doesn't have a man in her life to, you know, come fix things. And that whole storyline with Puck was extremely gross on that front. The fact that this grown woman is helpless with building like a crib in her apartment, or her daughter gets injured and she immediately calls the high school fling that she's having, which is completely inappropriate. And, you know, she's like helpless without the man in her life. It's really crazy that like they think that like that's okay, that we can't just have an adult woman on the show who is like okay with who she is and isn't defined by needing a man or needing to be married or needing to have children. Even Sue, who also is traditionally gendered as like a woman, or well, she is, but she doesn't have like traditional gender presentation. You know, she's a little bit butch in some ways, even though she's a straight woman. But you have her decide she needs to have a child at all costs because her life is incomplete without a child. And, you know, I don't know, it's like old school. Like, do people really still think that, like, all women, that there's no, like, Sue Sylvester, there's no reason for her to have had a kid. It wasn't, like, ended up being, like, a big storyline. It just, we've run out of things to do with a female character. Better get her pregnant.
Yeah, it's not even like she had a relationship. It wasn't like a natural progression at all. It's not like she just decided, like, oh, you know, I'm in this relationship and I want a baby suddenly. She was not even in a relationship. It was just like, she's gonna get pregnant. So bizarre.
Well, it's because I wanted to make a lot of jokes about, you know, an old woman having a baby and her dried up vagina. I mean, that was literally, you know, a little hilarity of, look at this old skate getting pregnant. That was what it is. Oh, it's funny, LOL, because there's always been all those jokes about her not menstruating and her being old and her secretly being a dude and all this kind of stuff. And so again, it was another kind of LOL ladies moment for the show. And then they ended up doing you know, they took it a step further, of course, with the Down syndrome baby and all that, which is a whole other thing. But it was, you know, another reason to, you know, freaking make lady jokes. You know, dumb ladies having babies and being awful.
Yeah.
In case you missed season 1.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, we've been discussing the characters and there are all of the issues with them, but I think you also, obviously, you know, the characters don't have their own agency. They don't, like, write themselves. They have people writing for them. And so I think the question then becomes, how does the writer's room or the writers affect how these women are written? I mean, obviously, they're in charge of how the women are written, but I guess what I'm getting at is Ryan Murphy a feminist? Because I think Ryan Murphy thinks that Ryan Murphy is a feminist. I think if you asked him, he would be like, oh, yeah, of course, I'm a feminist. But, you know, like, I don't think he has any understanding of feminism. I think he comes from, like, he's a very, like, textbook white, gay, upper class male mindset, liberal mindset. Do you know what I mean by that? Like,
for sure.
Very, like, limited as far as caring about, like, understanding the complexities of demographics outside of his own.
He's like, but I'm not actively hurting a woman right now, so I'm a feminist. You know,
I employ women. I, like, you know, I employ women. I write female characters. You know, he has all of these actresses, and he does do a lot as far as hiring women of different ages and races. He's not like Joss Whedon. He does not stick necessarily, it's just like one narrow type, you know, of women that he likes to hire for his projects. But obviously that does not translate into writing good stories for women.
Yeah, writing.
Or having an understanding of what makes a strong female character, or the issues with the relationships between the male characters and the female characters, or basically anything outside of, like I said, of his demographic.
Well, I would argue isn't. I mean, again, I don't understand how Ryan Murphy interacts with the reality, because even that he just manages to fuck up on colossal levels. You just have to look at everything Kurt has done for the past 2.5
that's
seasons.
True too. That there are certainly a million issues with the white gay male characters that he's written as well. It's not only limited to women. It just seems that the women and racial minorities seem to get hit the hardest in a lot of ways. And I think, too, that, like, we kind of should discuss the actual history of who writes Glee, because, I don't know, I assume that most people kind of know the general thing, but I think it's interesting because Glee it started differently than most shows do, because it was, you know, for the first 2 full seasons, there were only 3 writers. And Ryan Murphy, Brad Falchuk, and Ian Brennan. And obviously all white men. You have Ryan as gay and the 2 others straight. Just, you know, throwing it out there as far as what their ranges are. And the thing is that most shows have a whole staff of writers, you know. You write a pilot, and that's only 1 or 2 people maybe, but then when your show gets picked up, you are told to hire a bunch of people. Well, Ryan Murphy, Falchuk, and Ian did not feel that was necessary, and they preferred working just the 3 of them, and it's an extremely ridiculous way to write a TV show, but, you know, I guess they more or less pulled it off for 2 seasons, and by the time the 3rd season rolled around, I could tell, I remember hearing interviews that they were being pushed as early as mid-season 2. They were being pushed by the network to hire more writers because they were like, you can't do this all on your own. The show is like too big now. Because Glee is like a really complicated production. Yeah. Aside from just writing. It's not like a half-hour comedy set in one main setting. It's like an hour-long drama, comedy, musical with like a bunch of different settings and everything. So it's a really difficult show, I think, to write for. But what happened was, obviously, at the start of season 3, they hired a bunch of new writers, and
like 5?
Only
like 5 new writers?
I think there were at least 5 new writers. Only 1 writer hired was female, and that is Allie Adler, who I think was renowned for Chuck. And she is a white lesbian. I think she's probably like 30s or 40s. But she was hired as a co-executive producer. So they did have a little bit more diversity in the writing staff by, you know, hiring not just a woman, but who was also gay. You also had Marty Maxon, who was hired. She was hired as a consulting producer. She did end up having 2 episode credits for Extraordinary Merry Christmas and Choke. She has obviously a history with a lot of different shows, and probably most notably to the internet, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which, let's just say, you know, you could probably talk about Marty Maxon for an hour and everything, that, like, her history with everything. Let's just say that she's not considered a feminist writer, and that she she had a lot of her own writing quirks, issues, problematic ways that she handled characters after taking over for Joss Whedon during season 6 and just season 6 of Buffy before Joss Whedon kind of came back and took the reins. So for season 3, those are the 2 women you have involved. Marty is only a consulting producer, and she, it seems, was hired on the behest of Fox. It seems like they recommended her for Ryan Murphy to have on board. You had Ali Adler, who wrote Pot of Gold, Heart, and Nationals. And for season 3, that was it. But then you had, at the end of season 3, Ali Adler was like, peace out, I'm going to go write The New Normal. Marty Noxon was like, nope, I'm noping the fuck out of this joint. We assume. We don't actually know the story behind that, but she left.
That's my favorite.
And to replace that, you had Stacey Traub, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, who was hired as a co-executive producer. And she had worked on Spin City, Suddenly Susan, Kitchen Confidential, What I Like About You. She had like a bunch of random credits as a producer and a few writing credits, but nothing really notable. And I think she got the writing credit for Swan Song. And I think what happens, though, I don't know if this is still in place, but I think I remember from other shows that when you have a full writing staff, that it is like union rules that one episode a season has to be written from someone who is not a staff writer. And I have a feeling that that's what happened with Marty Noxon and Stacey Traub. I don't think they weren't like involved in the writer's room on a day-to-day basis. It's probably even questionable how much they wrote of their episodes.
Yeah.
But I think that like it's a requirement that you have to have someone who's not like in the writer's room, who's not like a staff writer, write an episode a season. So anyway, that recaps Glee's vast female presence in the writer's room, a whopping 3 women.
I remember at the end of season 2, we were like, oh, we're getting new writers. You know, there was like this real, like, okay, things are going to be better. And we're going to have women, and it's going to be great. And then people were like, oh God, one of them is Marty Noxon. And, you know, you had a lot of people from Buffy fandom trying to explain why this was not necessarily a good thing. But I just remember our misguided hope that this was going to improve things. So,
I think another thing is that I know that from Veronica Mars, which was another show with some serious misogyny issues in later parts of the show, that was also another show that was a male-dominated writer's room. For the first season, there was literally 1 female writer, but I think they picked up 1 more for the 3rd season, who was a woman who had actually worked as like a librarian. And I can't even remember her name, but I was friends with someone who became friends with her. And this woman who had been like a staff writer in season 3 was like, she was talking about the show. She was basically like, yeah, it's impossible for some women when you're outnumbered to that degree. It's like a boys club that she, you know, you don't feel comfortable objecting to anything without like ruining the fun vibe of, because, you know, it's like a creative workplace. It's not, you know, necessarily like an office job that people, you know, you couldn't like object to content that maybe you found sexist or problematic without feeling like intimidated, and that the women who thrive a lot of the times in writers' rooms tend to be like one of the guys, quote unquote, you know, that they kind of like go along with that type of humor because it's really like the best way to like cope probably, or to at least kind of fit in and, you know, probably get hired for projects. And the thing, so basically what I'm saying is like, obviously there's a big issue with the writer's room of Glee being like so male, you know. I think it's obviously important for women to be involved creatively with media, since I think there's not that men can't ever write women. All you have to do is look at Michael Schur for Parks and Recreation. However, there is an importance of women being able to tell women's stories. So when women are deprived that, or when you have men handling female characters, I think there's a higher likelihood at times of things getting really fucked up really fast and really badly because there's no one present to be like, hey, wait a second, my personal experiences think maybe this isn't a great idea. Maybe we shouldn't, like, have the black girl in the show called a lazy diva who, you know, is just like a terrible person. Like, maybe that's not like such a hot way to handle it. Maybe it's not a great idea to like slut shame all the women characters. Maybe it's not a great idea to have the white straight guy like lead the coming out party for the Latina lesbian
and then
character.
Have her partner
you know,
not, like speak at all in the episode.
Exactly. But I mean, like, there's like a study that was done for the 2011 to 2012 TV season of all the major networks, and on all the shows that were surveyed, only 30% of women are writing. Only of the writers, only 30% are women. And obviously that's an astoundingly low number. I mean, that's also including not just drama and like sitcoms, but also like reality TV. So, you know, like it's really kind of like that's not okay. And Glee is just, you know, one more example. It's not an anomaly. It's just what happens on TV. But I think obviously that has like a big effect on how the women end up being portrayed.
Well, the one example I can think of that we know of it all from the writer's room where the women actually contributed, like, a woman's point of view was The First Time, which apparently, from something I remember reading, was going to be just like Kurt and Blaine. And then they were like, oh, well, because, you know, the men were like, well, you know, Rachel wouldn't lose her virginity until she was in college anyway. And the women were like, of course Rachel would be interested in sex. And so they added that plot into there, and they were like, no, you know, she's not, because they were like, oh, but it's funny that she'll be a virgin forever, basically. And the women put in there, and while the actual quality of the episode is debatable, it was, you know, Rachel at least got included in that because women said, look, you know, women have sex too. You know, so, I mean, that's the only thing I can think of where we know of anyway, any attempt was made at approval because there was
another example. Another example I could think is that I know Allie Adler mentioned that she had written the scene between Santana and her grandmother.
Oh, yeah.
And that she had based it on her own experiences with her grandmother who ended up basically dying without forgiving her for her alleged transgressions of lesbianism. So I think, and that was actually like a good scene. I remember you watched that episode and that scene sticks out like a sore thumb because it's actually like not a terrible scene and it's in a I Kissed a Girl. So, you know, like it sticks out. You're like, whoa, this like does not seem like it fits in with the rest of this total shit fest, you know? And so they did like try and do things. It's just not enough. And that's not on them, obviously. We don't really know what exactly the dynamics of the writers' room are, but just that I think there's obviously a big issue with Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk and Ian Brennan and probably a lot of the others like Matt Hodgson. Is that his name?
Did he have a credit on I Kissed a Girl? Matthew?
He was the sole writer credit.
He was the sole writer. Good for him. That's great. Okay,
and he's Allie Cook.
She was a hated name in fandom when that came out, I remember.
Yes, he was extremely hated. I think on all sides of fandom he was pretty hated. I don't think he had fans. He got very defensive on Twitter about things and how, like, he was, like, proud of his episode and, like, people are just being nasty and they don't respond well to criticism over at Glee. They're not like, I'm going to digest this and maybe think about whether or not it's valid. It's like, no, fuck you. Go back to your house, peasants. Like, that's like how they react to it. That's basically how they react to any criticism. There's no, like, consideration or thought or anything, respect given to dissenting opinions. They're only used as meta fodder to be mocked, you know? Especially if you're a female with an opinion. Yeah. Okay, well, that's been a little depressing, and I think we are almost running up to an hour, so we should probably close the episode on a little bit of a lighter note, and I thought that would be, let's talk about what Glee does do right with women and feminism. For me, the most obvious example of that is Lauren Seises.
Yes. Yes. I agree.
Lauren in season 2 was amazing.
Probably unintentionally.
She was, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to tell, like, how much of that was on purpose, but I thought she's like a female character who is not ashamed of how she looks, even though she is not conventionally attractive. Even though most of her storyline centered around Puck, it was not like she was defined by her relationship to him. She made it very clear that it didn't matter if he was with her or not. She would be fine either way, but, she wasn't going to wither and die, and she wasn't going to be crawling on her knees begging for his attention, that she did not let men treat her badly. She, stood up for herself. And the thing is that she was extremely hated by a lot of people in fandom during season 2.
The whole thing about how she assaulted Santana, and she was the meanest character on the show, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, are you watching the show? Do you, what? I can't imagine people found her so overly aggressive. So
I have to say, I think that if Ashley Fink looked more like Naya Rivera, that there would be less conversation happening like that. There's clearly biases from the audience. And a lot of talk about how Lauren was not, good enough for Puck, even though Puck was kind of a scumbag and a sleaze and not this big prize to begin with. But, but he's hot and she isn't, and that's, the biggest component to compatibility, I guess. So thumbs up for Lauren Seises. We're just going to pretend that season 4 appearance didn't happen because it was really awful and dumb, and I barely remember it anyway.
Season 4? I didn't.
Yeah, she showed up at the Sadie Hawkins dance. Did she show up at the Sadie Hawkins dance and then she was sad because she didn't have a guy there, or she was sitting on the bench with all the other single girls? Oh my god, it was so bad. I'm like, why did you even include this? You're ruining the legacy of Lauren Seises, Let's just, I don't think that was her. It was someone else.
It was Glee farts on anything good that it does.
Do you guys have any other, examples of things you think Glee got right when it comes to,
I think
women, feminism?
We touched on it earlier, but I think Unique was also a character that has had her moments, definitely. That was really kind of ruined by the catfish storyline near the end, but I really enjoyed how she was introduced and her gender was respected by the writing, it seems. Sometimes some of the characters were less respectful, but I didn't find it overly offensive, which I find.
But it was we were meant to find them disrespectful.
Exactly. It wasn't
I love that line that she says to Ryder when he's like, "You're not a girl," and she's like, "You don't get to decide for me, what I am.
Exactly.
I get to decide that." And I was like, holy shit, did they just, actually have that happen on Glee? Did they actually,
to say it
handle trans issues okay?
Yeah. And
I felt it took a pretty long time for them to, really stick to this idea. It felt like in the beginning they facilitated between, is Unique just a drag persona, or is Unique, actually a transgender woman? And finally they stuck to it, and they did do some good things with it. They didn't waver once they stuck to it. It wasn't they used feminine pronouns. They treated her as a girl in a lot of ways. She's one of the girls. She isn't, her gender identity comes up, obviously, as an issue, but it's been shockingly respectfully written for the most part, for Glee standards at least.
Yeah, definitely there are still, problematic elements to it, and it was weird initially when they were going back and forth from Wade to Unique. I wasn't really sure what we were supposed to think as an audience, but I do think by the end, catfish aside, because I honestly haven't even watched the catfish parts of the episodes because I just got so angry with Ryder. I just hate that guy. But, it was... But yeah, I was happy with a lot of what she was given. So
Could be. Did you have one?
I think both of those are probably the two that I would go to, the most pure kind of things that we didn't totally fuck up somehow. Everything else would be because for the most part, the other two things I sort of come to were things like, some of Santana's storylines, like season 2 with Santana, that whole arc from sexy towards the end of the season, I thought was, both good for queer women in a way that a lot of TV hasn't necessarily done, and that Glee, for a few brief moments, was capable of doing. And then there's been some stuff with Rachel, too, that I thought was, the speech that she gave to Finn and the breakup.
Yeah, the breakup.
I love that.
Of course was immediately undermined with everything else that she did over the course of the season. And that's
poor Rachel Berry.
Yeah, I have a lot of Rachel Berry rage, because she started out and she is probably my favorite character, but I think that's the thing. It comes back to the thing of Glee, which is they have that moment where you're like, yes, that is perfect, and then though it's going to be completely shat upon for every episode after that, and but you're waiting for it to happen again. So yeah, I would say probably Santana season 2 storyline, and then some of the things that they do where Rachel does get to be this ambitious, kind of wacky character. I like that she gets that. It's just that Rachel always has to be punished for it at the end. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we tried to scrape up some positive examples, and I think we got a few. So I think we've kind of discussed pretty much. Unless you wanted to fill another hour, which you easily could, Glee. I think we have generally summed up a lot of Glee's issues with women, which there are many, 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 many. Yeah, like I said, you could probably talk about it for another, 2 hours and just about, one season or one episode. I Kissed a Girl alone as an episode could be discussed for, 3 hours. Just talk about how terrible it is in every aspect. How terrible it is for women. To quote Quinn, I think you just had the feminist movement back 50 years with that episode. It's that terrible. However, Glee can be recognized for having a few moments, and I think, like we kind of said at the beginning, that the infuriating part of Glee is that it has so much potential and so many female characters who are portrayed by great actresses and who are very different characters that you don't always see on TV, who unfortunately just get peed on all over by Ryan Murphy and his stupid yellow hats.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up our first episode of The Call is Awesome. Yay! Yay! So hopefully people didn't fall asleep during all that rambling, but fuck you, you can sit through my feminist scholar if you want my fangirl, so. All right.
That's right.
I think we're all wrapped up, and
All right.
maybe we'll see you next time.
Yay!